last 2 years, AHDB has been working with East of Scotland growers in Fife in Scotland, running a series of trials on brassicas, in particular looking at broccoli. We're here today to catch up with James Rome from East of Scotland Growers and Angela Huckle from ADAS, and they're going to report on the trials they've been running this year and what they've learnt.
This year, 21, we decided to alter the trials slightly rather than re-looking again at fungicides and herbicides. We thought it would be worthwhile to look at something different, and the main considerations were the benefit of cover crops, or the potential benefit of cover crops, and also, probably more importantly, was a nitrogen response trial. This was mostly because the crop responds quite differently from area to area, and it affects the quality of the crop. And I had a belief that we could reduce our nitrogen usage, or at least improve our application of nitrogen usage, and have a benefit to the crop in terms of quality. We also suffer a lot from head rot, and excess nitrogen has a direct link to increased head rot within broccoli crops. The cover crops, there's obviously been a lot of talk in the wider agricultural community in the last couple of years on their use and their benefits. So we've decided to look at different cover crops to then be able to incorporate and trial strip tillage to a greater degree than we already do. The cover crop trials we ran this year were again on the back of something we did in-house last year, and with AHDB's and ADAS's help, we tried a variety of mixtures over winter. Also, the other part of the conversation was how to destruct the cover crops, with the view that in the future we may lose glyphosate, and we wanted to have a bit of a plan of how to deal with the implications of that. The main focus of the cover crop trials have been Phacelia and buckwheat. That's because, in my view, they work quite well with the planters. They don't tend to ball up in front, and they're quite friable. Also, on an overwinter crop, you do not have too much residue to deal with in the following spring. We did have a wide mix of other things, looking at rye, oats, etc., and clovers as well. And we're doing more in-house on that front as well. But this year's crop work, as Angela's been mostly looking at the soil structure and the benefit from different mixes.
I've been involved in the broccoli trials here for AHDB in Scotland for 2 years, working with East Scotland growers. So for 2021, we've run several trials, mainly on broccoli for East Scotland growers, and that's involved a screen of biostimulants to continue the work from 2020. We also have done work with cover crops, which has been done in the field behind us. So prior to this broccoli crop, there was cover crops put in, and we've assessed soil structure of those. We've done broccoli and response trials at 2 sites. There's one at Fife and one at Blairgowrie. So that involves different rates of nitrogen, and what we're looking at is how the crop responds in yield, marketable yield, and also whether that affects something called head rot and spear rot, which could be an issue if you've got higher rates of nitrogen, because it gives a softer growth. So biostimulants, you don't often see such a big response as to any applications as you do with something, say, like nitrogen or major elements, and it's something that growers here are particularly interested in doing. So because those responses are likely to be small and differ from season to season, we wanted to take those different treatments and do them over a couple of years to see if we could get any kind of consistent response from particular ones. So we have some initial data in. There was one particular programme last year which looked useful and did seem to appear to give a reduction in head rot in the assessments that the growers did. We've repeated that in this year. It hasn't stood out as much as it did last year, but it's not been worse than the untreated control. I think there's subtle differences in head size, which I think the growers could pick out, things they might find useful from it. Also, there's some that haven't actually given a response at all, but there's actually been no significant differences, sort of statistically, between any of the treatments. We ran the N response trials to determine the optimum N rate without detrimental effect to the quality on the crop with head rot. So we did this by applying a range of different rates. So there were 6 nitrogen rates from 0 nil N up to 270 kilos of N per hectare. apply to different plots, and this was replicated 3 times at each trial site. So there's 2 trial sites, one at Fife and one at Blairgowrie. We also looked at the timing of application, so one particular rate, which was what we thought was the standard rate used, 220 kilos per hectare. We either applied the first dose a month before planting or at planting alongside the rest of the treatments and rates to determine the effect that those have to have on the crop, on yield and quality. Potentially what we're looking at is the balance between putting on a nitrogen to increase yield against if you put too much nitrogen on, you can then increase the risk of head rot. We did actually see that in the trials. So that is it's quite a fine balance between what the growers have got to achieve there. Soil type definitely was something to consider because crop will respond more differently on a more bodied soil type and require different amounts of N to that on a lighter sand soil. And as growers in Scotland grow across a range of different soil types, that was something that we wanted to take into account. There's also regional variations in weather here. Another reason growers wanted to look at the amount of nitrogen they're putting on is to look at whether they could reduce it to have less impact on the environment and also reduce costs. But the initial conclusions is that you can increase yield, which is head size, with increasing nitrogen, but you will increase your risk of getting head rot if the conditions are right for it to occur. So that's a balance you've got to take with it. So I think what we've got to do further is look at the economic end response. So with figures from James here on costs, we can then look at where the cost benefit analysis is and where that economic end is.
This is now, I suppose, the end of the 2-year project that we set out to do, and it's unfortunate we've not been able to continue because I think it's provided some really useful information and brought value to the group with some of its findings. And yeah, between AHDB and ADAS, it's been really worthwhile.